I'll ask you my first question while I get it going. All right, I'm back. So on Monday, well, actually, Brian, first off, congratulations on your primary win.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited about it. To be honest with you, what I'm really excited about is to be able to focus on the next 5 months. We've got a whole lot that needs to happen between now and November, and to be able to really put my full energy on that and to not have to focus on my own election now is really exciting.
Awesome. So on Monday, Supreme Court's decision declared that LGBTQ people are protected by existing civil rights law. I invited you on today to talk because you are an expert in comparative law and you're also a lawyer. And I thought you'd be good to talk us through it. So tell me, one, what should the community be looking at in this decision? What does it mean for us?
First and foremost, what I think is important for everybody to recognize is that it actually is the victory that so many of us think that it is, or that it might be, or people are concerned that it could be. So many of us have gotten so uncomfortable with feeling good about news coming from any branch of government. We've gotten so concerned about what it looks like to hear and get good news about our community that I think there's a hesitance, a reticence to accept this for the good news that it is. And it is phenomenal news. I'm a civil rights attorney. I'm obviously openly LGBTQ. And in my lifetime, this is the greatest LGBTQ civil rights decision out of the Supreme Court, for sure. We'll have a time to talk about Ogerbefell and in Windsor and all of the other Supreme Court cases that have in many ways led up to this, and the ones that I think need to come next. But first and foremost, this is the win that many of us in LGBTQ advocacy were hoping for. And you know, listen, anybody that was concerned about it not happening had an appropriate concern. There's just no way to look at this Supreme Court, to look at public policy right now and not be nervous or worried that this decision could have gone the other way, which would have been really defeating for many of us. And you know, a 6-3 decision, which many important Supreme Court decisions are, shouldn't be cause for concern. Actually,
and what does that mean that it's a 6-3 decision versus a 5-4?
Sure. What it means is that 2 of the conservative justices on the U.S. Supreme Court sided with equality, sided with the LGBTQ community. Now, that doesn't mean that they are now going to side with the liberal side of the bench on all issues. One of these justices has already in recent history sided against the LGBTQ community. So that's not something that's unheard of. But the legal precedent, the argument here, the Title VII arguments that were being made here were so much a part of the fabric of what many Americans consider to be our civil rights spectrum, that while I'm very excited, I don't think I was even all that surprised to find out that 2 justices had sided with a majority, and that majority supported equality. It does bode well for us in the future, I think, because a number of these questions are still going to be presented before the Supreme Court. You know, that's great that this is a Supreme Court that doesn't think that people like you and I and our friends and family should be able to get fired for being LGBTQ. But what does that mean about housing? What does it mean about insurance? What does it mean about, you know, going to a restaurant or checking into a hotel or going to college? There's a lot of issues that still need to be resolved, but this gives me hope that we're dealing with a Supreme Court that can look at the issues as they relate to American civil rights law and not as they relate to American, you know, partisanship.
What do you think goes into the decision from what inspired those conservative justices to join the liberals? What do you think goes into their heads? I know people like to kind of play prognosticator about what's going on behind the scenes. You know, was it a really exceptional LGBTQ clerk that sort of made an impression on them? And we know that knowing us, when we come out to people in the workplace, when we come out to them in the state house, it changes how they think about our community. Do you think that's part of what goes on for Roberts and Gorsuch?
I not only do I think that's the case, I actually think that it's impossible almost to divorce the impact of our exposure from all of the things that are happening for us that are positive right now. You know, I've been fond in the past of saying that pop culture, music, television, media have done more for LGBTQ civil rights than any member of Congress. And unfortunately, that's probably still true. And yet here we now have a massive, a huge step forward for LGBTQ civil rights, and it is coming from the government. And you know, I can't guess what Roberts and Gorsuch were thinking. I know from the opinion that they helped write and that they signed on to, that they did approach this case with what I consider to be fresh eyes and without biased eyes about who we are in the LGBTQ community. You know, I know that, sort of as you alluded to, perhaps the most impactful thing that we can do as LGBTQ people is come out to the people around us. It becomes significantly harder statistically, empirically, to oppose LGBTQ equality when you are surrounded by LGBTQ people, as everybody in America is. The 2010 census said that we were in 99.8% of counties in America. You know, we were probably too busy running those other 0.2 counties to fill out the paperwork. We're everywhere. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised at all to learn that Roberts or Gorsuch or all of the justices have, you know, LGBTQ people in their families, in their lives, on their staffs. You and I both know conservative members of Congress. You and I both know opponents of LGBTQ equality that will often sort of try to hide behind the fact that they have a gay friend. But that's quite different than working in and around and with us as communities. And I suspect that that's probably what happened here as well, at least in some part.
I think also part of it is, let's not get it twisted, right? Let's remember where public opinion is on this issue. The vast and overwhelming majority of Americans support protections for LGBTQ people in the workplace. So this is an absolute case where the Supreme Court is not leading, but they're following. And I think that also has something to do with the 6-3 decision, especially with Roberts joining and not wanting to feel like completely going against the tide of history.
Sure.
In this case.
And we saw the sort of traditional, traditional opponents of any Supreme Court decision always say the same thing. They say you're legislating right from the bench. We saw that in the dissent. We've heard that from some of the conservative members of Congress. And as a lawyer, as a civil rights advocate and activist, it's simply a misnomer to call this anything other than what it is. And it's a decision by the Supreme Court about law that has been in place for quite a long time. I'm glad that it's reflective of, you know, the sort of the beginning of the current American approach to LGBTQ values and equality. But even if it wasn't, as in the past, oftentimes these cases haven't been, it was the legal right thing to do, based upon, again, a part of the American, a part of our American values, a part of the American ethos that most people ascribe to when they're talking about their love of this country, and yet somehow they're able to divorce that from equality for all people. But we who do this know better. This is the most American decision. This is quintessential Americana, that the Supreme Court would recognize that LGBTQ individuals in the country shouldn't be fired, shouldn't be discriminated against in the workplace because of our sexual orientation or our gender identity. It already fits perfectly well within the larger ethos of civil rights decisions from the Supreme Court, and in years to come, it will continue to fit perfectly well within that sphere.
Pennsylvania is one of the states that did not have protections for LGBTQ workers prior to this decision. What does it mean for Pennsylvanians, for the people in your state?
It actually means a lot of things, and again, I'm quick to say that most people don't know what it means, and not because they're not smart, because it can't be known really yet. There is going to be a lot of lawsuits that stem from a decision like this that will test the boundaries, test the scope of federal law. What I know for certain is that what we don't have in Pennsylvania, and what this ruling doesn't impact, is all of the other areas that we generally consider falling within civil rights law. Now, Ruben, you know this, every single state in the country and the federal government protects certain types of people from certain types of discrimination. You're protected often because of your nationality, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, and your gender identity now, but a whole slew of issues. And you're generally protected in areas of housing, employment, public accommodations, sometimes education, sometimes insurance. And as we know, this decision only really impacts employment. And so, here we are in the state of Pennsylvania where, yes, it's now going to be significantly harder for a person to fire someone strictly because they're LGBTQ. But I can still get kicked out of an apartment that I rent. Although I'm blessed to live in Philadelphia where that can't happen. 70% of the people that live in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania can still be dramatically impacted because we don't have the full spectrum of civil rights.
And how about for somebody who lost their job in Pennsylvania, who was fired for being openly trans or openly gay last month? What do they do now?
That among the many issues that still sort of remain to be seen when we talk about the breadth and scope of this is exactly that. Now, my guess is, and it's just a guess, is that they probably won't have a claim. I've been asked similar issues about people who were fired from religious institutions, and my guess is that they also won't have a claim. But I want them to bring those claims, and I want those claims to be successful. I just, in comparing issues like this, when we've seen these sort of micro steps towards equality, there are a number of places that we've just still never been able to get full equality. And among those many places, for example, are religious institutions or trying to apply laws retroactively.
We have a question that came in from Facebook. Our friend Colin Wright from Atlanta, Georgia, messaged in and asked if there's any concern that Gorsuch is using this decision as a sneaky way to advance textualism, the cause of textualism in the decision. Any thoughts on that?
It's a great question. It's a super smart question. The quick answer is I don't know. I think we're going to be years away from being able to sort of look back on the decisions of Gorsuch, the decisions of Roberts during this time period, and try to sort of flesh out whether or not they were a part of a larger strategy. I certainly hope not. I think that textualism falls apart all the time when it comes to issues of civil rights and equality in the United States. And I think it's often used as a hook to hang the denial of equality upon. And so I think the concern is certainly valid.
Something I've been thinking about, I was listening to a podcast yesterday where some LGBTQ leaders, it was actually Willem and Alaska from Drag Race, were talking about some of the issues that we're facing. And I realized that there's just so many things that people, well-meaning, don't kind of get all the intricacies. And so textualism, what is textualism?
Textualism is the adherence. It's essentially the idea that the strict language of the Constitution needs to be adhered to the way that the strict language of the Bible needs to be adhered to. Now, I'm not Christian, I'm not Catholic, but I know that almost all faiths have some struggle between the sort of the originalists and the progressives, or however you want to define the sort of nouveau approach to faith. And I often find that for people, this is a really apt analogy that helps them sort of understand the difference between the two. And textualism is an originalist approach to the Constitution, which again, for anybody that's a student of history, anybody that's a student of civil rights, it sounds kind of almost like exactly what it is. Like it's being used to avoid what in law we call penumbras. Penumbras are all the spaces in between things. It's literally, I think, the phrase for a space in between. And so while we have a lot of rights that are laid out in the Constitution, so many other rights come from the penumbras. The sort of whole right to privacy, which is really fundamental to who we are in the United States, isn't really laid out in our founding documents, but is a fundamental part of the sort of the American legal structure. And I think under a completely textualist view of the Constitution, a textualist view of the review of laws, I think that we lose a lot of those rights from the penumbras in law where they've been found.
Over the last 3 years, I've been thinking about how much we are in need of kind of a civics lesson in our society, just reminding people how the government works and how a functional government should actually work. And it would help us in sort of our battle for equality. And so I want to, I know you have a huge platform in thinking about how do we get this information to our people? How do we teach them what a penumbra is? I'm appreciative that you took the time to explain that. So thank you for that.
Thank you for asking. And I'll tell you that, not to be too conspiratorial about it, but when we see, or when we as a world community that is supportive of democracy are looking at countries around the world where democracy is being born or being developed or being nurtured, among the things that we do to make sure that those democracies will flourish is we ensure education about the democratic system. It's one of the sort of the quickest, fastest ways to get people to adhere to a democratic system. To get people to vote is to teach them why it matters, who it impacts, how it impacts them. What is the ripple effect of your vote? What's the ripple effect of an election that you supported? And so by the converse of that is also true. When we don't teach those things, people, they have a significantly less understanding of the true value of their vote. I get asked all the time, for example, by young people, they're like, I get bombarded all the time with telling me how important my vote is, but are people even listening? And I often say, nobody in campaigns has time to waste time or time to waste money. And so when you hear that you're being reached out to, no, it's because you are valuable. And what valuable in campaigns means is that you have power, the power to elect people that can change things, or the power to elect people that won't. And so for me, and I know it's true for you, and it's something that the Victory Fund has focused on for years, educating people about why the things that we do can be so impactful is often a trigger to get people engaged. We know that having out people in legislatures has a ripple effect of equality. We know that when you elect a person to a representative body who has never been a part of that representative body before, that the ripple effect is as empathy from other people who haven't expressed it before. These things have very specific value that we do need to be talking about more, no question.
Valerie Valuechek, and I probably have mispronounced their last name, but Valerie Valuechek sent in a question about the rollback of LGBTQ protections in healthcare that the Trump administration just pushed through. Does this cancel it out? Unfortunately, I know the answer to it, but I want you to address it as well.
Well, so the answer is we actually don't know. I know that there is a lot of thought that it does and a lot of thought that it doesn't, but I hate giving, it's more of a lawyer's answer than a legislator's answer. The lawyer's answer is that we actually don't know. We're going to need to see cases that come through state courts and federal circuit courts before we know for certain. We're talking about the difference between sort of treatment and employment. So it's a super complicated issue. My hope is, and my thought is that yes, it absolutely is going to impact this decision. If not because this new sort of precedent establishes this idea that LGBTQ people are due equality, and that the Supreme Court now knows that. And so it's impossible to sort of divorce any lower court decisions or any legislative ideas about, for example, what happens in healthcare now from the knowledge that the Supreme Court believes in LGBTQ equality. Now, they were asked a very specific question. They weren't asked all questions. And so we don't know for sure across the spectrum, but I suppose my long-winded answer is, while we don't know for certain, I can tell you in the short term that yes, it is, and that any lawyers who are bringing cases based on this new interpretation will be referencing these new Supreme Court cases, or the consolidation of these three cases.
One of the risks of a win, and let's not make any mistakes about it, this was a big win for our community this week, but one of the risks of a win is that there becomes complacency after that. Have we achieved something in our movement? Are we done now? Are there parts of us that are done? And we don't want our community, our movement, our allies to think that we're done now. How do we keep people inspired and ready to fight all the way through November and beyond for equality?
I think, listen, one of the ways is to remind people of all the different ways which, you and I and our friends and family and neighbors are still second-class citizens. Like I said earlier, whether it's in education, or, at a university or at a private school, whether it's in hospital care and places that receive federal funding, whether it's in housing, the fact that I can get kicked out of an apartment that I rent, the fact that can still happen to LGBTQ people and does happen to LGBTQ people is critically important. And I think that we're already seeing the right things. We are centering the people who are most impacted by this. We're not trying to pretend to tell their stories. My friend Adrian Rivera-Reyes often says, don't pretend to give a voice to the voiceless, give them a microphone. And we're seeing that right now. We are seeing people directly impacted by the lack of equality in a whole bunch of systems, frankly, designed not to have equality, voice up and be strong. And there's power in that. And while yes, cis white people like me can still get kicked out of their apartment for being LGBTQ, what the reality is that more often than not, some bigoted landlord that doesn't like the fact that he has a trans woman of color in his building and wants to boot her out will do it for that reason. And we need to make sure that he can't do that to her.
Right. We have another question in from Facebook. It's kind of I think a little bit of a SCOTUS nerdy question, but it was thinking about the authors of opinions. Rich is Liberal from out there in Facebook asked, he'd rather have had a Kennedy authored opinion than Gorsuch. What do you think the difference is on who writes the opinion?
Oh, so for all people that have studied equality in the Supreme Court, especially in the modern era, Justice Kennedy is somebody for many of us that will always be sort of a legendary figure. Right. He wrote some of the major cases about LGBT equality in the country. I will forever be sort of frustrated with the timing of Justice Kennedy's departure and sort of what that created for us. But what I hope the Gorsuch opinion tells us, well, and in fact, I don't even have to hope. I know one thing that it tells us right now, and that is that he is comfortable siding with equality, that he's comfortable siding with the liberal members of the bench, and he's comfortable doing that despite the Trumpian era that put him there, and that he is still very much, an active part of. And if that's the kind of, dare I say it, backbone that we can expect, then I want to support it. I want to make sure that listen, we're going to have these justices for a very, very, very long time, these younger conservative justices. And so seeing early on that they are able to draw a line between right and wrong, even if it is a very clearly delineated partisan line, gives me a little bit of hope, dare I say it.
There are other important decisions coming up. DACA is on the will be coming up, a decision probably any day now, maybe any week now.
Any day now.
Can we make any assumptions based on this decision?
No. One of the things that we know from conservatives in the modern era is that they are somehow able to sort of do the moral and academic and mental gymnastics that it takes to think that some people should be discriminated against and others shouldn't be discriminated against. I think you combine that with the very latent racism that we know that sort of comes out of the justice system in America directly. You combine that with really, having very, very few people of color, for example, on the Supreme Court. I don't think that unfortunately, I don't believe that we can derive any kind of opinion based on this decision about what we're going to see from DACA. Again, we see every single day how people can pretend to support LGBTQ people but hate brown people, or pretend to support the American dream but hate people who have fought perhaps the hardest in the modern era to achieve it or to receive it.
How much do you think the Supreme Court as an issue will weigh in on the November election? Will people be thinking about this? Will it just be front of mind, the makeup of the court as they vote? I know we talk about it a lot.
I wish.
Do you think it actually makes a difference?
It does make a difference. I mean, I wish there was almost as no better argument for the 2016 election that could possibly have been made than the makeup of the Supreme Court. And, it did sway a majority of Americans, or it was part of what swayed a majority of Americans. But I can't stress it enough. And I actually think that most people know this. The vast majority of what we consider to be our day-to-day rights in America have come from the Supreme Court, have not come from Congress, or have been impacted by the Supreme Court in a way that we kind of know them to be right now, and weren't based in, from Congress or from legislation. And so I want everybody to understand how important this is, but I suspect that where it will have the most impact is that it will remind people that we can still see and have good things, that we don't have to throw up our hands and admit defeat, that even in this era, that civil rights can still win, that the day can still be carried by equality and by goodness and righteousness. And they say that fear empowers people more than love or joy, and I don't know that that's true. I want people to both be fearful of this administration, and rightfully so, but also know that we are months away, or maybe years away from being able to fix so much of what has been wrong here in the last couple of years, and then get way past it, because nobody should be pretending to get back to any kind of normal. The normal was terrible for so many people, and we now know what a new normal can look like. We just have to sort of fight for it, pursue it.
Another question came in. A Christian evolution, that's what they're asking. Gorsuch and friends fronting this decision. Does it show some evolution from Christians on thinking on this? I would guess, when you look at the number of Americans that support LGBTQ protections in the workplace, that number has to include many, many, many Christians. And there's millions of Christians that are allies to us. I think what's exciting, like you said, to see that Gorsuch and Roberts would put themselves on the line that way.
I certainly hope so. I had a colleague that passed away in the Pennsylvania legislature named Mike O'Brien. And Mike was a Christian through and through, and could quote the Bible better than anybody I've ever met. And he did that as a out proud liberal. He would say, I'm not a progressive, I'm an old school liberal. And so, for me, I know that that people can find within the Bible, within Christianity, Catholicism, whatever it be, strong, authentic support for equality. I think what the data tells us is, believe it or not, that Catholics, for example, are the most supportive of equality when you ask them about LGBT equality, but they also are the most likely to be impacted by the messages that they hear from their church. And so I hope that those messages now are include the leadership of the Christian members of some of the Christian members of the Supreme Court.
Absolutely. So, Brian, I want to thank you for your time today. This is a great decision, or a great decision, but also a great conversation. Decision. And I hope people learned something as well. Just to end on a fun note, tell me who you're supporting in Drag Race Season 5, All-Stars. I know you're a Drag Race super fan, as am I.
Yeah, I'm a super fan. If you had told me that Derek Barry, maybe I shouldn't be giving, I won't give anything away from a single episode. All right.
Right. I think it's a spoiler-safe thing. But
yeah, I think this is Shea Coulee's to lose. Every single thing that Shea does, she does impeccably and on point. It's a phenomenal season. There's a bunch of queens that are in this. I love Cracker. But I, from what I've seen already, Shea Coulee is everything that Rue looks for an all-star, and that I think the rest of us do too. I can't wait for these next couple episodes.
Shea Coulee, I don't know if you've seen it yet. It's on YouTube. Shea Coulee was a part of a march, a Black Lives Matter march led by drag queens. I think it was in Chicago. And Shea Coulee made a fantastic speech coming off her fantastic look from last Friday that just floored me.
Bodysuit.
Amazing. Everyone should check that out, but check out her speech as well. Somebody online, Deborah Jen Panaro, said that she's a Jujubee fan, and so am I. I'm old school like that.
I'm old school like that at all. You know this about me, Ruben. My favorite queen of all time is Tatiana from season 2. Tati, if you're out there watching, I'm a super fan, and you should be on All Stars every single season.
If you have a chance, everybody, watch Tatiana's lip sync challenge against Alyssa Edwards. It is not a moment wasted. You'll love it. Any parting words on Drag Race, on life, on politics, on Pennsylvania, on the Supreme Court you want to say before we close out?
All I would say is that if you're watching this and you're thinking, that you want to get more engaged, you want to get more involved, if you've got an LGBTQ candidate in your area, in your region, in your state that you want to support, the LGBTQ Victory Fund is who you should reach out to. The Victory Fund and the Victory Institute are doing more right now to raise support for LGBTQ candidates around the country than any organization that's out there. One of the things that Ruben and I both know is that there's nothing that we talked about right now that wouldn't be better with more LGBTQ voices in government. And so if you're watching this and you think that you might be the right person for this, first of all, you probably are. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, you know what, my friend Erica is exactly who you're talking about, we probably are as well. So please check out the LGBTQ Victory Institute and the LGBTQ Victory Fund and learn more about how and why you can get engaged in these next couple of months to help us take back the White House, help us take back Congress, and help us put in place a government that actually looks and acts more like all of us around the country.
And thank you for that, Brian. You set me up for a plug to close this out with. LGBTQ Victory Institute is doing a candidate and campaign training virtually from July 23rd to the 26th. Registration is open at the Victory Institute's website. We would love to see you there. It's going to be a fantastic 3.5-day training. Brian's done the training himself and has been a guest speaker multiple times throughout the years as a trainer, but would love for anyone to apply for that. If you have ever had an inkling of wanting to run for office, please think about it. We need you. We need you desperately in our ranks, and to join Brian and all of the people, I think 856 elected officials across the country right now. But we would love to have you join him and join all of them. So Brian, it's such a pleasure to see you and to talk with you as always. Victory is so proud of everything that you do and proud to stand with you. So congratulations again on your win, and look forward to seeing you in person hopefully very soon. Thank you so much.